we ended with silence. A battlefield, emptied. An empire, shaken. A queen, gone. No grave, no monument, no final word. Only a story, carried by breath, and that is what makes it unsettling. Because when history goes quiet, it usually means something has been lost or hidden. The truths we feared are finally coming to light. But as the fog clears, a new terror emerges. Because Tomiris was never just a story about war. She was a doorway, and behind that doorway was an entire world we barely understand. A world where nothing stayed still, where identity shifted with the seasons, where survival demanded something most empires could never master: adaptation. Out there, if a man fell in battle, there was no ceremony, no hesitation. A woman stepped forward, not as a replacement, not as an exception, but as continuation. In these windswept lands, life did not wait for permission. The same hands that held a child at night could draw a bow at dawn. The same voice that sang stories by firelight could command warriors into battle. Because out here, there was no luxury of rigid roles, only necessity. And necessity creates a different kind of power. But power alone does not hold a people together. Belief does. And for nomadic cultures, belief did not live in temples. There were no towering cathedrals, no sacred cities carved in stone. Because when your life is always moving, you cannot tie your gods to a place. So instead, they carried them, in the wind, in the fire, in the endless sky above them. Imagine it, a vast steppe, no walls, no borders, just horizon in every direction. The wind moves constantly, it never stops. And to them, that wind was not empty, it was alive, a messenger, a voice, a warning. Mountains were not obstacles, they were guardians. Rivers did not just flow, they carried spirits. Fire was not just warmth, it was sacred, a presence to be respected or feared. Life itself was a conversation with the unseen. Among the steppe warriors, oaths were not sworn in halls, they were sworn under the open sky. Because the sky was always watching. Break your word, and you did not just betray a person, you betrayed the world itself. Among the Scythians, rituals were raw, immediate, no robed priests, no distant ceremonies, just warriors calling directly to something greater. Smoke rising into the air, horses sacrificed, voices lifted into the silence above. And somewhere far from the steppe, in the deserts, the Bedouins listened to something else. The unseen, spirits in the wind, whispers in the night. They believed the world was filled with presence, invisible, unpredictable. A lone traveler could be guided or misled. A poet might not just be inspired, but possessed. Because in that world, words carried power, and power was never fully understood. Further east, another belief took shape. Among the Mongols, the sky itself became divine. Not a god within it, but the sky, endless, blue, watching everything. They called it the eternal blue sky. It did not speak, it did not intervene, but it judged every action, every decision, every rise and every fall. Even the greatest conquerors claimed their power came from it, that their victories were not theirs alone, but granted. And beneath that sky, shamans walked between worlds, not kings, not generals, but something in between. Healers, guides, interpreters of what could not be seen. They spoke to spirits, read signs, advised leaders, because in a world without walls, you needed something else to hold meaning together. And this is where it becomes clear. Nomadic life was not chaotic. It was precise, flexible, adaptive. It bent without breaking. And that is what made it dangerous. Because empires build strength through permanence, walls, cities, monuments. But nomads, they built strength through movement, through memory, through the ability to disappear and reappear where you least expect them. So when a queen like Tomyris rises from that world, she does not fight like an emperor. She fights like the land itself, unpredictable, relentless, uncontainable, and suddenly her victory makes sense. It was never just strategy, it was culture, belief, identity, an entire way of life colliding with something rigid. And when the two met, only one could adapt. But this realization leads to something far more unsettling. Because if power can exist without walls, without records, without permanence, then what else has history failed to capture? What other stories were never written? What other names were carried by the wind and then lost? Because Tomyris may not be the exception, she may be the evidence that we have been looking at history all wrong. And if that's true, then what comes next changes everything. But the deeper we look, the more the past begins to shift, and what waits beneath it is far from comforting. The world we uncovered was not built on stone. It was built on movement, on memory, on people who left no monuments behind. And yet, they shaped everything. But now, the story shifts. From open skies to iron rails, from wind to steam, from memory to machinery, because the same force that once moved with horses was about to be captured, chained to steel, and driven across a continent. You can almost hear it, the distant echo of hooves, slowly replaced by the grinding rhythm of engines. A new world is arriving, not carried by the wind, but forced through it. In the mid-1800s, a nation stood divided, not just by war, but by distance. To cross from east to west was to disappear for months, sometimes forever. Between them, 1,700 miles of wilderness, mountains, deserts, silence. But then an idea, simple, impossible, a line of steel stretching across it all, binding a fractured nation into one. It sounded like unity, but beneath it, something else was growing. Because just like the empires before, this was not only about connection, it was about control. Two companies, two directions, racing toward each other across a land that was never empty. The Union Pacific from the east, the Central Pacific from the west. Each mile of track worth land, money, power. So they built faster, harder, recklessly, laying rails that might never be used, competing not for progress, but for profit. And beneath every mile, hands, calloused, bleeding, unseen, Chinese laborers carving through mountains, Irish workers laying track across endless plains, freedmen chasing survival in a new world, cooks, blacksmiths, teamsters, supply haulers, no statues, no recognition, just labor, because railroads are not built by vision alone. They are built by those who are forgotten. You can picture it, men suspended over cliffs, chiseling through stone, snow burying entire camps, while work continues beneath it. Explosions, avalanches, silence after, and still the line advances. From the west, they break through the Sierra Nevada. From the east, they cross the plains, and somewhere in between, a meeting point is chosen. Promontory Summit, Utah, a quiet place, until it wasn't. May 10th, 1869, two locomotives facing each other, breath against breath, steel against steel. Between them, May 10th, 1869, two locomotives facing each other, breath against breath, steel against steel. Between them, a final rail and a single golden spike, engraved with hope, unity, destiny. Crowds gather, officials, executives, men in fine coats. Telegraph wires stretch outward, carrying the moment to an entire nation. A hammer is raised, and with each strike, a signal travels. Click, across cities, across states. Click, church bells ring, cannons fire, people celebrate. The country connected, 7 days from coast to coast, a miracle. But look closer, who stands in the photograph, and more importantly, who doesn't? The Chinese workers who carved the mountains are not there. The laborers who laid the rails are not there. The ones who built it are missing, because history often frames the victors, not the builders. And beneath the celebration, something darker settles, because the railroad did not just connect, it cut through land, through lives, through entire worlds. Indigenous nations watched it arrive, not as progress, but as a warning. The buffalo disappeared, sacred lands divided, trails replaced by tracks, and with every passing train, a way of life faded. Resistance came, fierce, desperate, but the machine did not stop. It couldn't, because once progress becomes profit, there is no turning back. And so, a continent changed. Cities grew, markets expanded, time itself was reorganized. But at what cost? Because beneath every rail, there are stories, not written, not recorded, but felt, echoing, just like the nomads before them. These people shaped history and were almost erased from it. So now we return to where we began, a world where love was controlled, where lives were negotiated, where power decided everything. And we followed that thread until it led us here, to a different kind of empire, not built by kings, but by industry, by ambition, by steel. And just like before, it asked the same question: what is the cost of progress? Because whether it is a queen on horseback or a railroad across a continent, the pattern remains. Power expands, and something is always lost. But here is the most unsettling truth of all. The nomads were never defeated, not completely. Their way of life, their memory, their spirit, it didn't vanish. It adapted. It survived. In stories, in cultures, in the quiet resistance to being forgotten. And maybe that is the final lesson. History is not just what is written. It is what endures, in wind, in steel, in silence. We began with love. We followed it through power, through war, through empire. And now we stand here, at the edge of something deeper. Because if entire civilizations can disappear, if entire truths can be buried beneath progress, then what else is still hidden? What else is waiting to be uncovered? We have only scratched the surface. The most chilling discovery is still waiting in the dark. The rails were laid, the nation was bound, and the cost buried beneath every mile of iron. From the windswept steppes of forgotten queens, to the silent, moving worlds of nomads, to the thunder of steel that reshaped a continent, this was never just history. It was power. It was survival. It was the story of those remembered and those erased. Because in the end, history is not only written by the victors, it is carried by the wind, echoed in the land, and hidden beneath the things we choose not to see. We've reached the end of our 3-part journey, but stories like this, they never truly end. Follow for more stories where history reveals its darker, forgotten truths.